بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Amma ba'd, I welcome you to the first of our series of classes entitled Lighthouse. And before I begin, a small disclaimer: I am a bit under the weather, so apologies about my voice. May Allah Azza wa Jal cure all of us that are sick, inshaAllah ta'ala. Today is going to be an introductory session and somewhat of a rambling, if you like, of miscellaneous topics. And I want to begin by pointing out that nobody chooses the time or the era that we are born into. It is Allah's choice on us. We didn't choose when to be born, when to live, which challenges that we face. And the fact of the matter is that the bulk of the trials and tests that are laid out for us deal with issues that are relevant to the time and the place and the geography of where we live. And therefore, every generation has challenges that are unique to that generation. The fact that we're born into it many times blinds us to this reality, and we assume that these challenges are universal. But the fact of the matter is that our generation in particular is facing a unique set of challenges. As the Chinese say, may you live in interesting times. We are living in interesting times. More has changed in the last 100 years of our existence than in the last 100,000 years of humanity. I repeat, more has changed in the last 100 years than in the last 100,000 years of humanity. And that change is exponentially accelerating. The most obvious area of change is technical and scientific. How people interact, global connectivity, technology are simple realities that even I, as a child, could never have anticipated the type of world we live in today. And by the way, the amenities that you take for granted, your daily routine, your daily access to your lifestyle, that you and I take for granted, the access to clean water, fresh fruits throughout all of the seasons, air conditioning, water heating, your car, you're flying in half a day so that you're across the world. You do realize you, as an average middle class modern citizen, is living a more luxurious lifestyle than all of the ancient kings and emperors and pharaohs combined. Your lifestyle is more comfortable than the lifestyle of even the pharaohs and the emperors of old, and you take it for granted. But it is not just advancements in science and in medicine and in technology and in the quality of life that we're here to marvel at. These changes have not come in a vacuum. They have come amidst social, cultural, and religious transformations. And it is those changes that we as Muslims are navigating and trying to make sense of. And so in today's introductory class, I want to give a bird's eye view of miscellaneous topics. First and foremost, a very, very brief synopsis of how these changes have been viewed by a select group of philosophers and thinkers that I want you to be aware of. In other words, the changes that we're seeing at the cultural level, the religious level, the rise of secularism, the absence of religion in the modern world, the failure of religiosity, of Christianity, these changes, many people are embracing them. Many people are happy at them, but others are wary. And I want you to be aware of a group of thinkers who are not too happy at these changes. And I want to introduce you to names and concepts and ideas that inshaAllah ta'ala will provoke you to do your own research and study. That's going to be our first brief foray. After we summarize some key figures that I think every person who's interested in this topic should be aware of, we will then move on to us as Muslims. How do we navigate these changes? What are some of the areas of challenges that we are going to face? And then putting these two together, I'm going to conclude today by introducing us to the concept of this class, right? So the changes that have taken place, how they're analyzed, how those changes affect us, what are the areas we're grappling with, and then therefore putting all of this together, the need to that class. And as I said, today's class will be a little bit of an overview and rambling, and that is done on purpose because we have to situate ourselves in why exactly we're here today and what is the content and what is the need to talk about these areas that we are talking about. Now, obviously, the first topic is a brief introduction to some of the key figures that have pointed out these changes are coming at a cost, and these costs are not all positive, they're also negative. A number of key Western philosophers, Western intellectual thinkers have, if you like, foreborn, they have warned of the impending catastrophes that are happening in the Western world, and they point out that unless something happens, the future is not as bright as many claim it to be. And I want to begin by perhaps the first person who was the if you like, the beginning iconic figure to start thinking of civilizational shifts. We go back 300-400 years, a name that not too many of you are familiar with, and yet he is iconic in the Western hemisphere. It is a historian and a philosopher by the name of Edward Gibbon. Edward Gibbon, in the 1800s, he wrote a magnum opus, an iconic work called The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And Gibbon was one of the first to really point out a civilizational shift was occurring, and that is that Christianity is ceasing to lose its place in the Western world. Now, Gibbon is of course writing at a time when everybody's religious. Do understand, even 200 years ago, there was no such thing as a bona fide atheist. You could not reject religion publicly. Even as recently as 200 years ago, if you openly denied the existence of God, you would be socially ostracized. There was a famous case of one of the professors of Oxford losing his professorship in 1821 because it was discovered that he was a secret agnostic. He didn't even come out and say it, but he was talking to his friends and they complained about him that this person doesn't believe in God, and he was removed from his post. This is 200 years ago. How quickly the world has changed, that in 200 years, if you did not believe in God, you would be fired from a professorship of the humanities, a professorship of science at Oxford, because that was something that crossed the red line. So again, Edward Gibbon is writing at a time when you cannot publicly be antagonistic towards religion, and of course outwardly he was a religious person, yet nonetheless you begin to find within his writings a bit of a dismissal of Christianity. He actually believed that Christianity was one of the primary causes that was the cause of the decline of the power of the Roman civilization. When I say Roman here, think of Western civilization. So in the 1700s, in the 1800s, Gibbon is already pointing out that it's because of religion that we've kind of been held a little bit backward. His work reflects an early Enlightenment skepticism towards organized religion, and it provides a gateway for the foundational critique of religion's role in public society. This is the beginnings, if you like, of trying to dismantle religion. And his work is not as much a critique of Christianity per se, because he can't get there yet, but it is more a critique of the institutional role of Christianity and not the theology of Christianity. And he seems to claim that the decline of the greatness of Western civilization is due to Christianity because, believe it or not, religion asks you to focus on the afterlife rather than civic responsibility. So when you start thinking of the afterlife in his mind, what happens is you erode the civilizational strength of the world that you live in right now. And so he believed that Christianity and its emphasis on spirituality was actually detrimental overall. And of course, out of all of the thinkers we're going to quickly introduce today, today, he is, of course, the most excited about the changes because he's writing in the 1700s, 18th century, the 1700s. So he hasn't quite realized where Western civilization is heading. 100 years later, when people have seen the beginning of the decline of Christianity, the tone of so many Western thinkers changes, and a few people that every one of us should be aware of, especially if you're interested in the role of religion in the public sphere, is the famous German philosopher Max Weber, who died 1920. And Max Weber, he wrote his influential work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And in this work, which actually played a vital role in the revitalization of German philosophy in the continental sphere, and especially here in America. In this work, Weber linked the development of modern capitalism to Protestant values. He claimed that Protestant values brought about the spirit of the capitalist Reformation. And at the same time, he noted the paradox of religion. He claimed that while religion contributed to the development of rational systems like capitalism, he also said its dominance waned as rationalization advanced, i.e., the more rationalistic you are, the more scientific you are, the more it will impact religion. And as it impacts religion, it's also going to erode civic responsibilities and duties. And he predicted that religion, while it would not disappear, it would have less and less of an influence in shaping modern life, and it would become more private and less institutional. He predicted this almost 180 years ago, and he turned out to be correct in this prediction. Around the same time as Weber, perhaps the last great iconic philosopher of the Western world, and I mean here Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of the most iconic philosophers who diagnosed the problem of the rise of modern secularism and the absence of religion in the public sphere. And of course, Nietzsche is famous for his blasphemous line, "God is dead," which is one of the most oft-quoted statements of our times. And a lot of people simplistically assume that Nietzsche was an anti-religious person. But the fact of the matter is that Nietzsche's stance on religion is very complex. While he was not a fan of Christianity, and perhaps in his own life he veered towards atheism, his views go far beyond a simplistic rejection of religious belief. Nietzsche, when he said his blasphemous phrase, "God is dead," if you read the actual passage, he is not triumphantly celebrating that there is no religion or there is no God in his worldview, but he is observing that the Western culture shift away from religious faith is in fact a testimony to their own demise and death. In other words, Nietzsche predicted that the death of God is going to signal the death of Western civilization. Nietzsche predicted that if you remove God from the picture, then unless you replace it with something more meaningful, with something that will give morality, that will give nobility, that will give cultural and existential frameworks, unless you replace God with something that is just as sacred as God, what you've done is you've created a vacuum, a cultural void that would lead to an existential crisis of the highest magnitude. And while he, in his own view, claimed that you needed to substitute God with what he called a Ubermensch, or Superman. By Superman, who we don't mean your Marvel comic Superman. We mean the notion of man being, if you like, almost divine in his own way. While he felt that this is the only way forward, obviously neither he nor his followers could actually successfully substitute the role of religion and God. And what Nietzsche does point out is that without religion, you have removed the only stabilizing force, the only unifying force, the only source of order and morality. And so by removing God, as one of his famous passages says, that as the passages that villagers are quote unquote, astaghfirullah, celebrating the death of God. And he actually remarks on this, that do the fools not realize that as they celebrate the death of God, they are celebrating their own demise as well? He literally points out that they're not thinking things through. When you remove religion, then what is the purpose of life after that. And in fact, Nietzsche himself famously went crazy towards the end of his own life, perhaps, if you like, demonstrating what happens when you really don't have a higher sense of purpose and of nobility of living. So Nietzsche is a classic, if you like, iconic figure who argued that unless and until you're able to substitute religion with another set of values, traditional values such as truth, such as justice, such as compassion could no longer be justified. And when you remove compassion and truth and nobility and justice, society is left vulnerable. Society is left deprived of even a cause for existence, and you open up the door to moral relativism and to existential despair. And of course, Nietzsche is considered to be the last of the great philosophers of the Western tradition. There are a number of philosophers in our times that I strongly encourage all of you to be familiar with. And again, the people that I'm quoting are those who pointed out the dangers of these changes taking place. Some of these are coming from a religious paradigm, and some are, while they themselves might not be religious, they point out the dangers of not having religion in modern society. Perhaps the foremost modern philosopher still alive in our times, I think he's 100 years old, well, maybe 95 years old, is the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor. Charles Taylor wrote A Secular Age. And this is considered to be a magnum opus. All of you should at least read a summary of it or get a Cliff Notes version, whatever you want to call it. It is a seminal work of our times. It's called A Secular Age by Charles Taylor. And in this book, he explores the remarkable transformation that has taken place in the Western society, in which barely 150 years ago, it was inconceivable to be a part of Western society without believing in God. And yet in our times, it is almost inconceivable that a person who believes in God will make that the center of his existence unless they're a cleric or a preacher or a pastor. Otherwise, as a politician, as a public activist, as an entrepreneur, as a CEO, if you have a religious belief, it had better be private, or else it would impede your progress and you will not succeed in the modern world. So he documents how this transformation takes place. The book is a massive 850 pages tome, and it weaves together history, philosophy, sociology, theology to provide a detailed account of secularization and its implications for modern life. And one of the things that Taylor does, and of course he himself is a devout Christian, Taylor challenges conventional narratives of secularization. And he provides a rich, multifaceted understanding of the processes that have shaped contemporary Western society. Taylor treats religion with intellectual seriousness. He explains how faith provides meaning and structure to human life throughout history. He claims that religion has never been irrelevant and it shall never be outdated. And he dismisses those secularist thinkers who tend to consider religion to be something that no longer needs to be discussed. Taylor understands that religion is here to stay. And in fact, belief in God, according to him, offers a profound sense of fullness that no other secular worldview can replicate. In other words, it is only religion that provides a profound sense of nobility and of purpose, and no other system that is devoid of religion can compete with religion when it comes to providing meaning in life. And of course, Taylor is coming from a Catholic background, yet at the same time, he is not advocating a simplistic return to Christianity. One of the things I like about Taylor is that Taylor is very candid that institutional religion has failed in his view, i.e., organized religion, as has been understood by the West, according to him, has failed to meet the spiritual and moral challenges and needs of the people. And this is why it has declined in the modern sphere. Taylor also acknowledges that living a religious life in a secular age is profoundly challenging. And he points out that believers must now grapple with a level of pluralism and a level of doubt that never existed pre-modernity. We as Muslims are going to come back to this point. Never have religious folks had to compete with so many religions and with so many non-religions at the same time. And never have they been exposed to the sheer quantity of doubts as they're being exposed to in the modern time. So Taylor points out something that every one of us is very familiar with as a Muslim in this part of the world. And Taylor also mentions that in order for religion to flourish, it is going to have to adapt to the modern world. In other words, he's not a simple-minded fundamentalist. Taylor understands that the damage that has been done to institutionalized religion will only will have to force religious folks to rethink through their religious traditions if they want to compete in the modern sphere of ideas. You can no longer be a simple-minded fundamentalist, according to him, if you want your religion to advance in the modern world. So Charles Taylor is a very interesting figure for us as Muslims to be aware of and think about. And he's still alive, although he stopped reading and writing for a while because he's so old. But his works really are considered to be of the most important works written of our generation. Another still alive, again, probably older than him, he's probably 97 years old now, and again at the very no longer active on social media or writing or reading and writing, but back in the 70s, 80s, and even the early 2000s, the philosopher I'm referring to is Alasdair MacIntyre. Alasdair MacIntyre is a Scottish-American philosopher who has written a number of books, most prominently After Virtue. Alasdair MacIntyre's book, After Virtue, is a profound critique of modern philosophy. And the title itself, After Virtue, he is critiquing the fact that virtue seems to now be something that is gone from the modern discourse. And we need to now rediscover virtue. And he argues that the modern Western world is in a state of disarray, a state of chaos, fragmented by emotionalist reasoning, where moral claims are treated as mere expressions of preference rather than grounded in objective standards. Morality is how you feel. Morality is what you want. Morality is your desires rather than grounded in objective standards of truth. So Alasdair MacIntyre is another great philosopher who is pointing out the moral bankruptcy of the Western world and the fact that religion, now that you've removed religion, you haven't replaced it with something else. Unless you do so, there is going to be a vacuum that is going to bring about destructive elements in the future. Other thinkers as well, just be aware of them. I'm not going to go over them in a lot of detail. The German philosopher Jürgen Habermas is another thinker. Habermas has written quite a lot. Now, he himself, actually, I don't think he himself is religious personally in his own life. Maybe he is, I don't know. But he's more a sociologist and a philosopher who has written extensively on Christianity, on Islam, in the Western context, and realize that in order for the modern world to flourish, there has to be a bridging of gaps between religion and between secularism. Secularism is but one competing set of ideas. It is not the absence of faith, it is a faith in and of itself. So Habermas continues to point out this notion that secularists don't have faith. No, secularists have a different understanding of faith. And at times you can be just as fundamentalist as a secularist as you can as a religious person. You can be a fanatic secularist as you can be a fanatic religious person as well. And so his vision is a post-secular society where secularism and religiosity have to learn to coexist together if they wish to shape a productive future. And so Jürgen Habermas, Jürgen is spelled J-U-R-G-E-N, Jürgen Habermas positions himself as a mediator between faith and reason, between secularism and religious movements, wanting to bring about a pluralism that is healthy for civic society. Another thinker that I believe Muslims should benefit from and be familiar with, these are all in the Western side of the world as well. Obviously, the Eastern side is a different set. We'll come to them later on, not today. Another thinker that I want to introduce you all to is the Catholic philosopher at Princeton, Robert George. Robert George is actually the only one of these that is active on Twitter and Facebook Facebook and social media, and he's constantly commenting on modern politics. So if you follow him, you get an idea of a modern thinker who's engaging challenges from a religious paradigm. And Robert George, again, has commented quite a lot, even on the Muslim side of things. He himself is a Catholic, but he is very much involved in the Muslim aspects as well, and he has had a number of dialogues with a number of Muslim thinkers in the Western world. Now, all of these thinkers, I believe it is important for us as Muslims to be aware of them, and the one thing that combines all of them, which is why I'm bringing their name up, is that they are pointing out that these changes we're witnessing are not all positive. These changes are potentially dangerous, maybe even destructive. And unless and until we recognize the destructive nature of these changes, it is possible that Western society will no longer exist the way that it exists. And so all of them are pointing out, some in more harsh words than others, the bankruptcy or the vacuum or the lack of a nobility that stems from having removed religion from the public sphere. Now, clearly, therefore, we're all familiar with the fact that these changes are impacting not just Christians, but us as Muslims as well.
فيا ذلي ويا خجلي إذا ما قال لي ربي أما استحييته تعصيني ولا تخشى من العتب وتخفي الذنب عن خلقي وتأبى في الهوى قربي فتب مما جنيت عسى تعود إلى رضا الرب تعود إلى رضا الرب